Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, December the 30th, 2025. So Brigitte Bardot has died, and I think it might be a good idea to talk about her horoscope. And, it's not just about whether or not you find Brigitte Bardot interesting. The point is, we can use her horoscope to get some ideas about how astrology is working. And I want to look at two particular events in her life. Firstly, the birth of her son, and secondly, her death. So she died on the 28th, Sunday the 28th, I think at 5 to 6 in the morning. And, it doesn't really matter what you think of Brigitte Bardot, whether you know much about her. I don't really know much about her. I might have seen one of her films, when I was a child, but, as far as that, I know that she was into animal rights, and she was perhaps controversial. She, in terms of her politics, was on the right, but, the point is, for a time she was a real icon, and I think that she is certainly worthy of comment. But before I talk about Brigitte Bardot, I want to look at the astrology for today. So here is the chart for today. In fact, that's Brigitte Bardot's chart. I'm not going to be talking about Brigitte Bardot's chart right now. I just want to talk about today. So here is the chart for today, set for noon, New York time, on December the 30th, 2025. And, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So the moon is very much in Taurus, and it's making a trine to the sun in Capricorn. So, that trine between the moon and the sun, okay, it might be particularly strong if you're in Europe or certainly in Australia or New Zealand. But, the point is the moon is in an earth sign, the sun is in an earth sign, and that does create, a general feeling that things are sort of running smoothly, that there is a general sense of harmony, provided we don't think too much. I think today it might be important not to think too much, not to worry too much. And the moon, having made the trine to the sun, it makes a sextile to Jupiter. So the beginning of the day, we've got moon trine sun and moon trine Mars. And then at the end of the day, it starts to apply to a sextile of Jupiter. So, all that sounds good. It's optimistic. Okay, it may not be super optimistic, because it's in sort of negative signs. So you've got moon in Taurus, sun and Mars in Capricorn, Jupiter is in Cancer, but it just gives a general feeling of comfort. But again, provided we don't think too much, and that relates to the main aspect of the day, and the main aspect of the day is a square between Mercury and Saturn. So Mercury, late Sagittarius, makes a square to Saturn in late Pisces. So you could be positive about Mercury trine Saturn, and you could say, well, Mercury trine Saturn is about sort of deep thinking, being able to really think about the things that are important, and we can be serious, and it's good to be serious. But the problem is with Mercury square Saturn is that think about Mercury in Sagittarius. Mercury has perhaps all these ideas, these hopes for the future. Maybe sometimes Mercury is overambitious in Sagittarius, because don't forget Mercury is in its detriment in Sagittarius. Then square Saturn, and Saturn can it's like a bucket of cold water, maybe a bucket of stagnant water in Pisces, but it's cold, stagnant water, and that can sort of bring us sort of back down to reality. And if we think too hard, it might seem that just nothing is working out. And we might also, with Mercury square Saturn, over-interpret things. So we might see something which in itself is meaningless, but we decide that it's a major slight on ourselves, that it could be an attack on our ego, or just evidence that we got something wrong. that were going nowhere, for example. So with this Mercury square Saturn, remember that it is an aspect that doesn't last too long. Okay, Mercury will move on, and it will make a square to Neptune, and it will make a square to the Saturn-Neptune midpoint. So in that last half decan, at the end of Sagittarius, those last 5 degrees of Sagittarius or 4 degrees of Sagittarius, we have to make sure that we just don't overinterpret. Yeah, we might feel down. We might think that things are going nowhere, but it's just an impression. And I think that when Mercury moves into Sagittarius, many of us are going to feel a great sense of relief. So that's the picture if we set the chart for New York, if we set the chart for Sydney, Australia. The moon is earlier in the sign. The moon, as you can see, is making a trine to Venus, trine to the Sun. So probably if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, you may pick up on the fact that the moon is trine the Sun more than if, say, for example, you're in the United States. And maybe that Mercury square Saturn is not going to be such a big influence today. Maybe that's more of an issue for tomorrow, New Year's Eve. So if you are in Australia, New Zealand, have a harmonious day. Enjoy the fact that the moon is in Taurus, exalted in Taurus, trine Venus, trine the Sun, and trine Mars to an extent. And in the end, it makes a sextile to Jupiter. But that moon sextile Jupiter, if you're in Australasia, is not really a feature until tomorrow. So probably an easier day in Australasia, perhaps a less serious day when there's less of a worry about thinking too much. And then there is the heliocentric view. If we put the sun at the center of the solar system. So heliocentrically, yesterday I talked about the fact that Mercury is making a heliocentric opposition to Uranus. Well, Mercury is making that opposition in spades. It's really, really powerful at the moment, and it is the main heliocentric aspect. And Mercury opposition Uranus can be about shocks, seeing things for the first time, being aware of things for the first time. And then there is a question of how we respond. And I think it's perhaps worth comparing Mercury opposition Uranus with Mercury square Saturn. So geocentrically, we've got Mercury square Saturn. Heliocentrically, Mercury opposition Uranus. And the combination of those two aspects on two different levels. I mean, heliocentric aspects tend to be more vague, more at a general level, more at a collective level. So, with those two aspects, it just may be that there is a lot of emphasis on our thoughts and where our thoughts are going and what we are interpreting, how we are interpreting. And, some of us might jump to conclusions very quickly. And I'm afraid it's possible that these conclusions may often not be particularly useful. So I would have said, don't jump to conclusions, especially if they're negative confusions. And whatever it is, there's no need to panic. And remember, we're talking about relatively fast-moving aspects. Mercury is going to be in Capricorn very soon, geocentrically. And, Mercury, heliocentric, it's a fast mover. Remember, it moves around the solar system in 88 days. So it's not going to be opposition Uranus for very much longer. So now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, December the 30th, 2025. Aries, you might continue to be thinking about what you have and what you don't have. I mean, that is the nature of the moon being in Taurus, and the moon is making a trine to Mars. It's making a trine to the Sun, and those two aspects. Okay, particularly powerful at the beginning of the day, but I think it's a feature of probably the whole day, and I would have regarded those aspects as being quite positive, being about what you what you can achieve. We know what is possible. I know it's December the 30th, and it's about it's the New Year's Eve celebrations are about to start. If you're celebrating, well, maybe you want to celebrate the end of 2025. Maybe 2025 wasn't a great year. I don't know, but do think about the future, but not. You don't have to think about the future in some crazy, over-ambitious way. It's more about being really quite sensible about things, knowing what you need to do, and perhaps having an awareness of your limitations, but not going overboard on it. I've talked about the fact that Mercury is square Saturn, and with Mercury square Saturn, that's going to affect all of us. But as far as you're concerned, it might be about you having had high hopes, believing that many things are possible, suddenly starting to realize that maybe not. Maybe you have to be somewhat less ambitious and realize that you're not going to necessarily be able to see brand new horizons like now this minute. You've got to focus on what is real, and if you can do that, I think that you're going to be fine. And it's important, Aries, that you are sort of in control. It's always important that Aries is in control. Aries is an actor. I mean, that's a fundamental nature of Aries. And when I say actor, you are taking actions. I mean, I don't mean actor as in the theatre. So you're the one to move things forward, and you can also be realistic at the same time. It is a realistic day for Aries. You know what you can do, you know what you can't do. And at the same time, you're able to move things along, for example, by what you say. I think that, right now, Aries, you can be, very dynamic. You can speak in such a way that people listen to you. But, do be careful what you say. You don't just want to say something just for the sake of it. I mean, heliocentrically, we've got Mercury opposition Uranus, and that might encourage some of us to just say the first thing that comes to mind. But that's not really what it should be about. It's sort of tempering your enthusiasm with realism. Remember, Mercury square Saturn, but you can use that realism and perhaps bring other people down to earth and really tell it how it is. So, Aries, I think it can be a very constructive day when you can really think about what you want to do, what you need to do, and you're also aware of the limitations on you. I mean, limitations are not there to just hold you back. They're things for you to be aware of, so you can do something about it. And so, through your practical actions, you can really make sense of it today, and align yourself to 2026, because overall things are looking good. A lot of planets in Capricorn, Mars in Capricorn, your ruler in Capricorn, Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So I think this is overall a time for you to move forward. But today maybe a little bit of consolidation might be required. Taurus, the moon is still in your sign, completely in your sign, all day long in your sign. Moon is exalted in Taurus, and furthermore, moon starts the day making a trine to the sun, and it ends the day making a sextile to Jupiter. So that, Taurus, is, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty positive. I mean, it does allow you to absolutely make the most of everything that is available. And by the way, Taurus, I just want to change one thing, because I think I've got the Placidus house cusp up, and I just want to change this so that we have the 0 degree whole sign houses up. Sorry, let me just switch this. There we go. Oh, one more thing to do. Switch it back to have Taurus on the left. Sorry about this. One moment. Almost there. Forgive me. So Taurus, I do think that this is a positive time for you when you really are able to concentrate on yourself, and you can benefit from these trines between Moon and Taurus, trine the Sun, trine and sextile Jupiter. It's not that you have to do anything super dramatic. You can just largely be yourself. And we're talking about trines here. We're not talking about squares. So with trines, things just happen, quite easily. There's no need to push. There's no need to struggle. Just, do what comes naturally. Don't get distracted, though. I mean, that does matter. I mean, I'll talk about that in a moment. So if you want to get in touch with someone, or you want to get in touch with something, then I think you can. When I say something, there could be, for some Taurians, a certain spirituality to the day. I mean, that's always something we need to look out for. Me and spirituality, I don't know. I've got Taurus rising, so I mean, I to an extent can to an extent pick up on that. I mean, it's not something I necessarily always seek, but if you are on some kind of quest, or you feel you're looking for the fundamental spirituality in your material world, in the world you can touch, then I think that you can very much find it. And also, being a Taurus, you can be quite stubborn and focused on yourself and your own interests. And, it's always useful to get a better perspective. Well, I don't say a better perspective, but perhaps a superior, or no, a higher perspective. Looking at the things which don't necessarily just end with your life or with this stage of life. Looking for the beyond, and maybe that's something to think about. And you can perhaps align yourself to the future. I'm thinking myself about the late 2030s. That's what I do. I mean, I think a lot about the late 2030s, because when Neptune is moving into Taurus. I think Neptune moving into Taurus is something we really need. I think it's a shame that Neptune is not moving into Taurus until 2038. I think the planet really needs Neptune to be in Taurus, because I think with Neptune in Taurus, it's going to be a time when it is going to be a renewed focus on the environment. I don't think people really care about the environment anymore. I think that, people have their priorities, don't they? They have to get through the day. They've got their material needs. They've got their property rights, and they're not really thinking about the earth on which they're living. But that will change in the 2030s. I don't know, perhaps you're not interested in that. I think you are actually interested in that, because Taurus as a sign is quite environmentally aware, and it's also aware of the spirituality that is all around us. It's a spirituality that is in the material living world, the plants, the soil, the birds, whatever. It is all around you, and I think that with that moon trine sun, you are able to really get in touch with that. And you don't have to make a great effort. You shouldn't make a great effort. I think that is important. And another thing, Taurus, I think it really matters that you are not distracted. There are distractions today. You might get into something that is not necessarily wise. It seems attractive, but it's not right, and it could lead in the wrong direction. So if you find yourself tempted to do something you've never done before, which might, particularly if it's somewhat risque, or involves going somewhere you've never been before, being involved with people you don't really know very well, I would suggest that you hold back. I don't think you need to make any changes. I don't think you need to take risks. I certainly don't think you need to be looking for excitement outside your own sphere. So, think about the beyond. Think about yourself. Be grounded, but be grounded in such a way that you are aware of the spiritual dimension, which is all around you. Gemini, you are perhaps not firing on all cylinders, at the moment. And I don't necessarily mean that in a negative sense. You kind of want to do things at a slow pace. and you don't want too much attention. Perhaps there are things you want to do, even things you want to think about that you don't really want to discuss. And maybe you're thinking about past mistakes. When does a mistake become a mistake? Maybe a mistake becomes a mistake when other people find out about it. And sometimes mistakes can just be kept to yourself. So don't feel that you have to be especially open. That's not the same as being dishonest. It's not about being dishonest. It's just some things perhaps are best worked through on your own. And that doesn't mean it's going to be a bad day. I mean, the moon is making a trine to the sun. It's making a sextile to Jupiter. So in your own way, you can feel that you're doing something good, something that is wholesome, and the less distractions, the better. And I just don't think that when it comes to dealing with other people, I don't think you're going to be particularly effective. So I don't think that you should be seeking out social interaction. Now, one aspect that I do need to talk about is Mercury's square to Saturn. So Mercury square Saturn, well, it affects me. I mean, I'm a Gemini. I've got my sun in Gemini. So Mercury right now is in poor shape, you could say. I hate to say that, but it is. I mean, Mercury's in Sagittarius. It's in its detriment, and it's making a square to Saturn. So this might mean that there are moments, maybe morphin moments, of negativity today, when you start to think that really it's not going anywhere. What is the point? Geminis can have negativity. It in many ways it is part of the Gemini experience. Geminis can overthink. Geminis can think themselves out of existence. And what is the point? Really, what is the point? We're born, we live, we die. And we strive, we struggle, but in the end, it really is going nowhere. I mean, I'm not really very much sort of into philosophy, but you think of Schopenhauer. I think as I understand with Schopenhauer, you have an idea, you're always looking for something, but you never quite find it, and that is the terrible thing about being alive. But I think Schopenhauer also said that you can have moments of inspiration, for example, with art or sort of music. For a split second you can be completely inspired, and that can take you out of your struggle. So if you take a Schopenhauer view of the world, maybe that's what you should be aspiring to. But you maybe don't want to hear about Schopenhauer, and maybe when it comes to Schopenhauer I don't really know what I'm talking about anyway. But I think that there is an overall danger, Gemini, that you might look at things in an overly negative way. And perhaps it's just a question of being just too analytical. And what might set you off is, what other people say, how they respond to you. And that can be a Gemini issue, particularly if Mercury is in Sagittarius, your opposite sign. So when Mercury is in your opposite sign, that says something about how you relate to other people, and if you get negative feedback, it may really hurt. So I would suggest, Gemini, going back to what I said right at the beginning, that today might be a day where you do keep your own counsel. You don't have to get close to anyone, not really close, not so close that you put yourself in a position where you are discussing your ideas, where you are making yourself open to criticism, because I just don't think that would be helpful, because words can hurt, and your words can hurt as well. I mean, Mercury square Saturn, you can look at Mercury square Saturn in many different ways, but one interpretation of Mercury square Saturn is Mercury is the words, your words, they can be quite hurtful. You don't even mean them to be hurtful, but they can be hurtful. So that's another good reason why you need to keep a little bit of distance. And I think if you can keep some distance, then I think you'll be fine. It doesn't mean to say you have to isolate yourself, but perhaps you have to, keep everything at a fairly light level, and perhaps small doses of light social interaction. But fundamentally, with the important stuff, I think that's down to you. And I think that if you can do things largely on your own, do the important things on your own, that might be the best way of handling this Tuesday. Cancer. I'm fairly optimistic about today, Cancer. I don't see any reasons why it can't be a good day. I'm not saying it's going to be a great day, but there is enough to be sort of optimistic about. I mean, the moon is in Taurus. It's exalted in Taurus. It's a part of the chart which you relate very well to, and it means that you're quite fluent. Things move quite quickly, not too quickly, and you're able to adjust to an extent, but adjust in such a way that you don't have to compromise or give anything away. Not at all. You can just be yourself in company, and you may give the impression of being a grounding influence, and that's something that a lot of people are going to appreciate. And the moon is making a trine to the sun. Now, that trine to the sun is going to be particularly powerful if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but I think that it's other places. Other people in other locations are still going to feel that trine, and it's moon trine sun. As I always like to say, it's a very harmonious aspect. And if you're in the Americas, okay, the moon trine sun may not be the main influence, but then you're thinking about perhaps moon sextile Jupiter. So whichever way you look at it, the moon is well aspected, and it just makes you feel comfortable. And I think that your ability to relate to other people, at whatever level, is going to be pretty good. But it's not about excitement. It's more about comfort, feeling good in another person's company. So I think that, overall, that is, that really is, a big positive. So, you don't, I think, have to, spend your time, alone. I don't think that that's necessary. I mean, if you want to spend your time alone, that's fine. I think you're going to feel good. I mean, the moon is making a sextile to Jupiter. Jupiter is, still in Cancer, very much in Cancer. So moon sextile Jupiter means that, things are moving your way, and you can see a path forward. You can see how it's all moving along nicely. Perhaps when you start to contemplate 2026 and you're starting to imagine the way things are working, the way things are flowing, then I think that you can see that it is flowing in the right direction for you. And it just may be a time when you can just align. As we move into the last days of 2025, I think that many Cancerians will feel an optimism. And as far as things from a social perspective is concerned, it might be the case, Cancer, that if you want to do your socializing, if you want to be with people, reach out to people, maybe you should do it now. At Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, January the 1st, not so much. The moon will be sort of out of will be out of Taurus, will be into Gemini. I mean, when does moon move into Gemini? I mean, that's happening pretty quickly. Moon moves into Gemini on New Year's Eve. So, but when it comes to New Year's Eve, and if you're contemplating social activity on New Year's Eve, maybe it won't work out so well. So perhaps if you've got people to talk to, people to meet, maybe, do it now, and don't wait until tomorrow. Leo. There are definitely things, Leo, that you would like to do, that you'd like to get on with, and you don't really want to have to wait. I mean, why should you wait? I mean, there are things going on, there are things happening, things that you can take advantage of, and so that should perhaps be your priority. It is December the 30th. In theory, it's a normal weekday, and so if you've got things you want to get off the ground, perhaps of a career nature or relating to your ambitions, whatever those ambitions might be, I think that you have a chance to really sort of get on with it, and to demonstrate who you are and what you're capable of doing, and I think that you have certainty to you. I mean, certainty is important. It's not naive certainty. It's not like you have some crazy idea that's absolutely not worth pursuing. You just have a certainty that if you just keep going, you do what's important, then in the end you will reach your goal. And we do have a trine between the moon and the sun. I mean, a day starts with a trine between the moon and the sun. It ends with a sextile between the moon and Jupiter. And I think these two aspects can really push you forward. Not in a dramatic day. I don't think it is a dramatic day, though you are able to see things in the best possible light. I think that there is something about you, Leo, that it's grounded, but it's also quite optimistic. You can see what is possible if you put in the work, and that's also something you can transmit. You can transmit to others that, well, if you do this, then things can be great. So if you're dealing with people who are being negative, or perhaps they feel sorry for themselves, then I'm confident, Leo, that you can do something about it. You can transmit your enthusiasm, but it's not vague enthusiasm. You're not sort of living in the clouds. You know what has to be done, and there is something very practical to you, and maybe again that's something you can transmit, telling people, well, if you do it like this, if you follow the things in a sort of a logical way, then you can accomplish what you need to accomplish. And so if that might mean that you are a good person to have around. So if you happen to be working over the day with other people, then you're going to be a major force for good. Your positivity will really stand out a mile off. Well, even if you're not working, if you're just with other people, whatever venture you might be involved with, maybe it's with your family or others, then I think that your positivity, but also your practicality, they're just going to come together. So I think that today, Leo, things can happen. Slowly but surely, and don't forget to smile, don't forget to be positive and enthusiastic. You might think that people don't want enthusiasm, but they do. And if you can demonstrate that, you'll be demonstrating it to yourself as well. I mean, that's how it starts, isn't it? You feel positive about your own prospects, and then you can transmit that positivity to others. And even if you're not talking about your own positivity, people can pick it up. I mean, Leo is... Your ruler is the sun. The sun shines. The sun gives off energy. And I think today, in a rather quiet way, you are giving off a lot of positive vibes. Virgo. It's another day when we've got a lot of planets in Earth signs, of course. So being a Virgo, you respond pretty well to all of that Earth. And you can see how things are working out, and you understand what's going on, and from a practical perspective, you don't miss anything. The details are all clear, the details are in place, so you are feeling certainly grounded, and that is a good place to be. Now, it is possible to be too grounded, to just be too focused on the real world and practicalities and calculations and how the how the real world works in a sort of sense of physics. And, if you get to that stage, there's some danger of just being ever so slightly negative. And the problem here is that, arguably the main aspect of the day is a square between Mercury and Saturn. Of course, Mercury is your ruler. So Mercury square Saturn, it just can be something conspiring to get you down. You're happy in your world, absolutely happy, but something is challenging you and is maybe even suggesting you shouldn't be happy. And so where does this problem come from? It might well come from other people. Not everyone is constructive. And if you have got people around you, wherever you are, whether it's at home, work, family, whatever, if there's someone who is something of an authority figure, who is a bit stuck in their ways, who has a track record of being critical or not being particularly enthusiastic, maybe that's the kind of person you should avoid. Although we have to look at things in another way. I mean, Saturn could represent someone who is prepared to impart wisdom, is prepared to tell you the truth, and that might get you down. On the other hand, you don't want to overinterpret things. But there does seem just this possibility that other people might sort of get you down. They might really make things rather difficult for you if you give them a chance. And maybe it's best, Virgo, that you don't court other people's company, particularly if we're talking about other people who, have a track record of being negative. I mean, that is, not what you need. And, the Mercury square Saturn, it is a difficult aspect. And Mercury is moving towards a square to Neptune. It's starting to move towards an aspect of the Saturn-Neptune midpoint. So if you do find yourself feeling negative, and it may not be because of another person, it just might just be the case. If you do find yourself being negative, thinking that everything is a waste of time, ask yourself what is going on. It might be that your perceptions are not real, that you're just exaggerating in a negative way. And that's what Saturn can do. I mean, Jupiter can exaggerate, and so can Saturn. Saturn can just make things just seem far worse than they actually are, when in actual fact, things might not be so bad. And don't forget, Virgo, that right now you do have a sense of agency. Agency is there. When I say agency, it's about you having a capacity to, make things happen. And if you don't like the way things are, Virgo, you can change them. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but you can have an idea. You don't like it, you don't like something. Then you can ask yourself, well, what actually do you need to do? Make a list. Decide what the process is, and then go through that process. It might not be spontaneous, but if you take solid action grounded in the material world, Virgo, then I think that soon enough you can create some important changes, and certainly useful changes. So that might be something that you want to think about. And as I was saying right at the beginning, the moon is trine the sun. Whatever's going on, you're fundamentally sane, you're fundamentally grounded. The harmony is there for you if you want to just accept it, and you don't have to struggle. And maybe that's the key. So I talked about Mercury square Saturn. You don't have to get involved in squares or struggling to incorporate something. When you've got moon trine the sun, you've got moon sextile Jupiter, and that just might be the capacity to see beyond the problems, and to actually, when you look at the fundamentals of your material world, you'll sort of realize that in fact you're quite well supported. Libra. Well, Libra, we have the moon moving through Taurus throughout the day, and Taurus is a sign which forces you to take a fairly serious approach. It may not be quite the approach you want to take, but Libra, I think at the moment you can be realistic, and you have the capacity to see through surface details. It's scraping away the garbage on the surface, and getting down to the fundamentals of it, getting maybe getting your hands dirty, getting soil under your fingernails, and maybe not literally, but that's perhaps what you feel you need to do. You need to do a sort of bit of digging. And I think the thing about digging is that, to begin with, the digging is difficult. I mean, I know that in reality, digging often gets, the more you dig, the worse it gets. I mean, where I am, sort of in Western Washington State, there's this glacial till, just rocks everywhere. And so you just come across these rocks. So digging is quite difficult. But as far as you're concerned, I think metaphorical digging, symbolic digging, it starts as being difficult, but after a certain stage, it just becomes easier, and you're able to, get down to the things that really matter. And so I know that Libra can be a sign that likes to dwell on the surface, but I don't think you have to dwell on the surface, and I think that you can really uncover, a lot of really sort of important details. But, don't go zooming off on tangents. That might be one danger today. Just perhaps the tangents are caused by other people making suggestions. Oh, have you tried this? Do you want to do this? You've never done that before. You might find it fun. That kind of thing. I don't think you want that. I think you want to keep things today uncomplicated. And as far as experimentation is concerned, I would not recommend it at all. Even if it seems attractive, it seems fun, I nonetheless, I just absolutely, would not recommend it. And, instead, as far as is possible, just try to understand what is going on without overcomplicating things. I mean, things are always going to be complicated up to a point, but maybe you do need to ask some questions. And if you happen to be working today, or thinking about working today, or perhaps trying to carve out some future for yourself, then you do have the capacity to really get to the bottom of things and to really understand absolutely what needs to be done. And so maybe today has a research element to it. You think hard, and perhaps there's been a recent problem, and you think about it, really as much as you can, and then suddenly it starts to make sense. So Libra, I think it's quite a serious day, but I do think that it looks pretty constructive, pretty useful, and over the course of the day you might have some important realizations. Scorpio. Moon is still in Taurus, so with the moon in Taurus, it may be difficult to avoid other people, and when you do come across other people, even if it's just a passing contact, they may have quite a significant impact on you, and so you should give people a chance to have an impact. It's not about weakness; it's perhaps about understanding what another person has to offer. People have all sorts of things to offer, and you shouldn't assume that people are always going to be looking after their own interests, that they don't care about you. They might care about you, and even if they don't care about you, people can accidentally have something to offer. People might do something with the worst of motives, but you might nonetheless be able to benefit from it. So do consider that. And the moon in Taurus is making a trine to Mars, making a trine to your ruler. So with moon trine Mars, I think that does give you the ability to communicate pretty well. I think that you're able to say what's on your mind. In fact, I think today you can communicate extremely well, and you can communicate at whatever level you want to communicate on. If you want to just restrict yourself to sort of vague small talk, not talking about anything in particular, then that option is entirely open to you. On the other hand, if you want to be dramatic and make a point and force people to listen to you, then again, you can. So I think that is quite a positive. And if you want to correct someone, or if you feel that someone is doing something wrong or is in the process of making a mistake, as a couple of people might be, then you're able to be very clear about it. So I don't think that anyone is going to misunderstand you. Now, being a Scorpio, you might feel you want to hold back. Why say something? Why mess with the piece? If everything is harmonious, why bother? Why rock the boat? Well, sometimes it's necessary to rock the boat. So if something needs to be said, I think you can say it, and the response is not going to be as overwhelming as you'd imagined. So if you need to be clear, then you can be clear, and just make some effort to listen. With the moon in Taurus, you've got to look at what people are doing, what people are saying. Give yourself the time to understand another person's viewpoint and another person's priority. And once you've worked out what's going on, you'll then be in a position to say whatever you need to say. So that's one way of looking at the day. It's probably the main way of looking at things. I mean, you also, Scorpio, don't feel that you're necessarily restricted to any one place. Sometimes Scorpios can be just too focused on one thing, perhaps one geographical location, and if you can go to a second location, needn't be very far away. It gives you a variety. I think you need a little bit of variety today. You don't want to be too single-minded, because that might be overwhelming. Sagittarius. It's been a time, Sagittarius, of probably a sort of adjustment. You're getting used to things, and it's not always easy. And there have been moments where you maybe just haven't been sure of yourself, and part of you has been feeling that you shouldn't stick your neck out, because you never know what might happen. And today, to an extent, continues that trend. And I think in many cases, Sagittarius, you just might feel that what you're really looking for is some kind of structure, organization, putting yourself in a position where you know what's going to happen next, and that is, I believe, something that you can do. The moon is making a trine to the sun. Okay, this moon trine sun doesn't affect you directly. I mean, the sun is in Capricorn, the moon is in Taurus, so it's quite a low-profile trine. But perhaps you need a low-profile trine. It does allow you to take things slowly, and that's perhaps what you need. In the recent past, things may have gone too quickly. But now things are slowing down, and you can slow down. And if you can slow down, that means that you can take the time to just make sure that everything is just properly structured, and in that it's all in order. And maybe that's all we need to say. And the moon in Taurus is making a sextile to Jupiter towards the end of the day, or it might even be into tomorrow. But that sextile to Jupiter does allow you to take stock of whatever's going on, and also to understand things which may be ever so slightly complicated. Some things are complicated. Being a Sagittarian, you'd like everything to be simple in some respects. But with this moon sextile Jupiter, you have the patience and the ability to stay with something. you stay with it, and to begin with, it might just not make a lot of sense, but in the end, you do get some clarity. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, and other people in general, it's not a day, Sagittarius. It's not a day, Sagittarius, where you need to feel sorry for yourself. Absolutely not. I think that you're beyond that, but you might find yourself feeling sorry for other people. Some people are not on great form. Mercury is making a square to Saturn. I mean, Mercury square Saturn is the main aspect of the day, and so with Mercury square Saturn, it's possible that some people need help, they need advice, and they're not really very sure of themselves. So, if you're in a relationship, for example, do think about the other person. Even if you're not in a relationship with them, if you just come across someone and you talk to them, or you just may be aware of their pain or their reservations or whatever's going on in their life. And so once you have that awareness that another person is not on good form, then there's a question, well, what do you do about it? Do you try to help, or do you run away? Maybe you just don't want the bad vibes of someone who just has a negative view, and they're trying to impose that negative view on you. That could happen. So you have to decide what is the right approach, and to an extent that is an ethical decision, because there is a feeling of self-preservation. You do not want to get involved in another person's negativity, particularly if they're absolutely insistent on being negative. But what if someone needs some help? Everyone might need some help. So be available, and just be prepared to listen and to look at the kind of cues that people are giving off, because there may be subtle cues that things are not quite as they seem. I really don't want to exaggerate. I mean, this Mercury square Saturn is an aspect, it's not going to last forever. But, Mercury is moving towards a square of Neptune. It's going to be aspecting the Saturn-Neptune midpoint. So do think about other people. Do think about also the people you're bringing into your life at the moment. Things might not be great. And also, you've got, it is, for some, quite a sociable time of year, particularly New Year's Eve coming up. But New Year's Eve with, I don't know. I'll be looking at New Year's Day chart very soon. But New Year's, at the time of a new year, there is a Mercury square Saturn. I mean, I don't know if that really says very much about New Year's Eve parties. So, for example, if you are planning on going to a New Year's Eve party with Mercury making on the Saturn-Neptune midpoint square Neptune, and to an extent square Saturn, maybe not. Maybe other people are just not going to be on particularly good form as the year draws to a close. But it's not your problem. Fundamentally, it's not your problem, although you might nonetheless feel that you can do something about it, that you can, in certain cases, make other people's lives better. Capricorn, there could be some irritations today, and the reason for that, Capricorn, is that we have got a square aspect between Mercury and Saturn. So Saturn is your ruler, and Mercury making a square to Saturn. Well, that could cause some problems. And normally when I've been looking at these forecasts of the 12 signs, I've been kind of suggesting, well, it's been poor Mercury having to deal with Saturn, but because Saturn is your ruler, well, we might say that it's poor Saturn having to deal with Mercury. And Mercury, it could be just irritations, things that you don't really want to have to deal with or even think about, but you're thinking about it anyway. And some of these things might just be in your imagination. They just might be your own fears, your own worries. You'd like things to be perfect, and as soon as you close your eyes, there's always things you're thinking about. Well, what about this? What about that? And some of these things might relate to your society, to your community. Other things might be really very down to earth. Is the water heater going to explode? That kind of thing. So it's difficult to be entirely relaxed with this Mercury square Saturn, and I'm not saying that you should be oblivious. If there are things to think about, well, then you've got to think about them. But don't worry about something. Don't worry about something if there's nothing you can do about it. Particularly if it's your society or your community. There's not much you can do about it like today, and don't let it overwhelm you, and don't let it spoil what in fact could be a pretty good day. I mean, the moon is still in Taurus. Moon is making trines to the sun in Capricorn, Mars in Capricorn. Moon also makes a sextile to Jupiter. So those aspects, as far as I'm concerned, are pretty positive. And if you're doing something that you're good at, that you enjoy, then what can stop you? And maybe that's what you need to do. Decide what is the best thing you could be doing today. Something that is completely in accord, with your personality, with everything you are, and then just get on with it. Give it everything. It's that kind of time of year when there probably isn't so much pressure. Okay, there's a pressure from your own mind and from your own worries, but probably you have got the time and you've got an opportunity to really do something well. So Capricorn, that is something that I would suggest that you do. And maybe also there should be something quite physical about it. I mean, don't they say that if your mind is driving you crazy, if you've got lots of thoughts and worries, then sort of, for example, physical exercise can help get through that. Of course, I'm not saying that that's necessarily what you should do. You've got to look after yourself from a health perspective. You don't want to do too much physically. It depends on what the state of your health is. But as far as your health is concerned, as if you can do as much physical exercise as is good for you today, I think that would be a good thing, especially if you're enjoying yourself, and maybe some sort of outdoor pursuits, just something to perhaps knock out the brain a little bit, just knock out that worrying aspect. But I don't want to create problems where none exist. It may be you're not worrying about anything. I'm just saying there is a possibility because of that square between Mercury and Saturn. Aquarius. I was talking to Capricorn just now, and I was pointing out to Capricorn that there could be an issue with a Mercury-Saturn aspect, and Saturn is your ruler. It's also Capricorn's ruler. So like Capricorn, you might have to deal with this Mercury-Saturn aspect, and normally with Mercury-Saturn, you think about, Mercury getting undermined by Saturn. But you could say, because Saturn is your ruler, that it is Mercury perhaps undermining you. And the question is, how is this likely to work? Now, Mercury is in Sagittarius, so Mercury is not in a great state in Sagittarius. It's in its detriment, and it's square Saturn, and then it's actually moving to a square of Neptune as well, and so we could regard Mercury as being an irritation, and things making you uncomfortable. But the question then is, where is this irritation likely to come from? And it could well be that this irritation comes from not yourself, not from your unconscious, but from other people. Other people could be irritating. And not just today, over the next couple of days, as we move into the new year, Of course, you've got New Year's Eve coming up, New Year's Eve celebrations, and I don't know what you're doing over New Year's Eve, but I would just suggest that New Year's Eve should perhaps be a little bit downplayed. I don't think with Mercury square Saturn, if you surround yourself with other people, I don't think you're going to be particularly happy. Whatever the New Year's Eve celebrations are, they are perhaps in the shadow of Mercury square Saturn, Mercury square Neptune. And that might mean that any New Year's Eve party is going to be a disappointment. Not every New Year's Eve party is going to be a disappointment. But from your perspective, Aquarius, it just could be that other people are just annoying. And they're starting to become annoying, especially if you don't know them very well. You're having to make the effort. You don't really want to make that effort. I'm not talking about people you know well, your close friends or your family. I'm just more talking about people vaguely, acquaintances. They're not going to be on good form. Perhaps you're not going to be on good form as well, but they're not going to help. And I don't think that you're really going to want to make the effort. And additionally, you might be thinking about the cost of it all. I mean, why spend money on enjoyment? That may be another way in which Mercury square Saturn is thinking, well, not just spending money on enjoyment, spending money on so-called enjoyment. People are supposed to enjoy themselves. People are, they want to enjoy themselves. They have to enjoy themselves. Enjoying themselves is a very serious business. But no, I think that you need to be realistic about that. And with Mercury square Saturn, money spent on entertainment, particularly in a group, is going to probably be money down the drain. And so that might be a way of looking at it, and money that you might resent spending. So that's so there is potentially a financial side to that, and when we talk about other people, and your contacts in general, you could just get angry by what people are doing. You're not really especially tolerant at the moment. Maybe it's just a case of you just not suffering fools gladly. And right now, there are a lot of fools around. So maybe you should instead just focus on yourself, concentrate on the fact that the moon is making a trine to the sun. It's making a sextile to Jupiter. These are pleasant aspects. But these aspects, from your perspective, Aquarius, they're best enjoyed in your own space. You don't have to go and seek them. So if you stay where you are, then I think that you'll be fine. You can enjoy your own company. You can enjoy the company of people who are close to you, but trying to have to deal with a big bad world and everyone in it, I just don't think that you're going to be in the mood. Now, I must make it clear that I'm not saying it's going to be a bad day. I think it just all depends how you treat it. I think it should be a day when you do respect your own privacy. You also have to give people a chance. If you know someone well, then give them a chance to be themselves. Some people are concealing real creativity as well as enthusiasm and real joy for life, but not everyone. Not the kind of vague person you just meet at some random event. It's the people you already know. So I don't think it's a day for surprises, and you shouldn't be seeking out anything or anyone who is new and untested. Pisces, I don't see any real problems today. I think that things should run pretty smoothly. You, Pisces, have a pretty clear idea about what you want and how you want to proceed. You have your own ambitions that might be important to you, and if you decide that you want something, then I'm really quite confident that you can get it. If you are enjoying yourself in the process, that would be great, but I don't think you have to enjoy yourself. I think that there is an underlying seriousness to you. And remember, there is a square today between Mercury and Saturn. This Mercury-Saturn square is, I think, the main aspect of the day. And this Mercury-Saturn square could be about you, Pisces, just concentrating on the things that matter. And yeah, you do not want to be distracted. So it's not really a typically Piscean day. If you decide you want to really think about something and see it through to its logical conclusion, then now might be your chance. If you wait until tomorrow or into the new year, you might have missed your chance. So perhaps, Pisces, we're dealing with a train of thought, and this train of thought has been developing over the last couple of days, and it's now really starting to come together. And so you need to continue this train of thought. Yeah, you do not want to be distracted. And so that that may be one way of handling things. But it might just be about dividing up your time. I think you can be, if you want, very sociable at the moment. The moon is making a trine to the sun. The moon is making a sextile to Jupiter. Jupiter is your ruler. So you fit in, and you are a calming influence. But I think it would be a shame if you spent all your time worrying about what other people are doing and what other people want, because you do have your own priorities, and you need time to think, and you perhaps need time to sort of to take your ideas, some of your very most constructive ideas, and turn them into something real. And so do see what you can do, and don't forget your own power. Because today you can be very intense, and once you decide something is important, Pisces, really important, then there'll be no stopping you. So in fact, it could be a day when you're able to really accomplish a great deal, or at the very least you'll accomplish enough so that at a later date you'll be able to pick up on it. So you might see something up to a point, you might sort of drop it for a couple of days, and then later in the week, early next week, as you move into 2026, you'll be able to pick the whole thing up again and really, really move forward to it. So, overall, Pisces, I think it looks like a great day, and I'm sort of quite optimistic in terms of how you handle it and what eventual results you get. And now it's time to look at things from a different view, and that is, of course, from a perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 46, which is pushing upward. Now, pushing upward is a good hexagram. It's about making progress. So, we're moving in the right direction. And, that's probably in accord with what we're seeing astrologically. Astrologically, we've got the moon trine sun today. We've got moving towards moon sextile Jupiter. So, the day begins with moon trine sun. It ends with moon sextile Jupiter. Also we also see moon trine Mars at the beginning of the day. So that just reflects this I Ching as well. So the I Ching is telling us, we make solid progress, and we just keep moving forward. It's not necessarily dramatic. We're not necessarily going to be drawing a huge amount of attention to ourselves, but we are getting there. And we do have a single moving line. The fifth line from the bottom moves. And what this fifth line from the bottom is telling us is that, we just need to take a solid step-by-step approach. And this is what Wilhelm's translation of I Ching talks about, step by step. There is a way to make progress. It's not through rushing. We almost need to think about sort of the decorum. Of course, if we're talking about the I Ching, we're talking about life in the court, maybe of a Chinese emperor, and everyone's got to behave properly. And so, yeah, we might be very enthusiastic about something, but we also have to understand decorum. We can't just get to completely obsessed with how wonderful we are. We mustn't think we're great. We mustn't be too enthusiastic. But instead, we just need to do it slowly. And if we do that, then we will be accepted. So wherever we're going, if we behave correctly today, we're going to make good progress. And so that is really something to hold on to, and we can hold on to it, and it can be lasting progress, because the hexagram this moves to is hexagram number 48, which is the well. And so the well gives us an idea of permanence. The well is something we all need. The village needs water. We all need water. We can't live without water. A community can't stand without water. So, what we're perhaps doing here is we're making slow but very real progress towards establishing for ourselves some kind of permanence. And maybe that's what we're all looking for, permanence, a permanent source of sustenance. And so I'm not saying today is going to be dramatic, but I think it's going to be solid. And so, in fact, it shouldn't be dramatic. Just take it slowly. And again, that's in accord with the astrology. Moon in Taurus, slowly moving forward, slowly moving towards your goal, whatever that goal might be. And finally, I want to talk about Brigitte Bardot. I mean, again, it's not whether or not one is interested in Brigitte Bardot. I mean, there's no doubt that she was an incredibly famous actress in her day. And of course, she recently sort of had a degree of fame, and with her interest in animal rights. So I think that it's certainly worth looking at her chart. Particularly as she's just died. And in her time, she was something of an icon. And so what I want to do here with Brigitte Bardot is I first want to look at her horoscope. And I haven't looked at her horoscope before. I mean, I knew she was a Libran, but I mean that was it. And so see what kind of person she was, and whether or not this is described by the astrology. So here is her chart, and you can see that Brigitte Bardot is something of a Libran. She has her sun. She has a sun in Libra, and she has a Mercury-Jupiter conjunction. I mean, that Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in Libra is completely exact. And so, how do we see that? Well, three Libran planets. I mean, that might explain why she did so well in France, because when the Fifth Republic came into being in 1958, so that would have been 1958. That would have been just after her 14th birthday, because she was in 1934. Maybe she has a certain resonance with the Fifth Republic because of that Libra, and of course she became a French icon. The French, or what they have this concept, what is it? As it's sort of Marianne, this kind of young woman who is symbolic of France, is the embodiment of France, and sort of Brigitte Bardot, to an extent, was that for a time. And so that Libra does say something. Does say something about her. But Libra is a very human sign. It's an air sign. Librans don't like things to be messy. And I know that, in the end, from the 1970s onwards, Brigitte Bardot got very sort of tied up with animal rights. I think that she was a bit of a pioneer there. She started to notice the slaughter of seals in Canada, and she got very upset about that. And since the 1970s, that has been a big focus of hers. So that might represent her Libran nature. And when you're talking about a female chart, you should look at the moon as well as the sun. I mean, she's a sun in Libra, moon in Gemini, so she's a real air sign. And air signs, again, they can like to be on the surface. They don't want things to get sort of too dirty, really. I mean, and I'm not saying that is who she was in the end, but I think that there is an element of that in terms of the way she handled motherhood, because she did give birth to a child on January the 11th, 1960, and clearly she was not happy with the whole event. She didn't like the way her body changed. She saw herself as being this sort of perfect female form, and then being almost sort of wrecked by having to change with pregnancy. And according to Wikipedia, she said about childbirth. Well, this is what Wikipedia says. She later wrote that her son was a cancerous tumor, and that she would have preferred to give birth to a little dog. She always added, "I'm not made to be a mother. I'm not adult enough." I know it's horrible to have to admit that, but I'm not adult enough to take care of a child. She refused to breastfeed Nicholas, that's the name of her son, and whenever she held him, he sensed her agitation and began to cry. So that is an interesting detail about her. And I'm not saying that to be negative about her, but it's just perhaps tells us something about the chart and how that excessive air might be manifesting. Additionally, she has no personal planets in water signs. I mean, she has Pluto in Cancer, but that's it. There are no other planets in water signs, and I don't count Pluto as being a representative of water. And with water, it can work two ways, having that lack of water. I mean, one way could be that detachment, that she was able to, I don't know if able is the right word, but having given birth to a child, she was able to sort of intellectualize it like she does and be quite honest about it. I mean, there is sometimes a lack of honesty in our society, but she's absolutely crystal clear about the way she felt about motherhood. But then, of course, you've also got with water, there is a sort of a lack, and there can be a reaction to that. And somehow maybe the lack of water may have ended up in terms of her concern with animals, because from the 1970s onwards, her concern about animals was very much a part of who she was. And so if you look at her chart, by and large her chart is sort of up in the air. I mean, her moon is interesting, because if you look at her moon, you see it's in the 6th house, and it looks as if the moon is below the horizon. In fact, when she was born, the moon was not below her horizon. It zodiacally looks as if it's below the horizon. But she was born at 1:15 p.m. I believe the moon set at 1:22 p.m. And so I think that is a really important point, the moon. It might seem something trivial, but the horoscope can be misleading. If we just look at a Placidus chart, we look at something and we think, oh, yeah, the moon is below the horizon. No, it's not. The moon was was definitely above the horizon when she was born. And so that does give it perhaps a strength that we weren't expecting. And I do think that the moon may well have been linked to her death, very much so. But I'll be talking about that in a moment. So, so yeah, we have someone who has a lot of air in her chart and no water. She does not have any Venus-Mars aspects. Marilyn Monroe did not have any Venus-Mars aspects. And, I mean, why should you expect her to have a Venus-Mars aspect? Her Mars was at 18 Leo and Venus is at 21 Virgo. But that might be an immediate impulse to say, oh, you know, Brigitte Bardot, she's a sex symbol. You'd expect her to have a Venus-Mars aspect in her chart in the same way you'd expect Marilyn Monroe to have a Venus-Mars aspect in her chart. But no, because this tells us something about the very nature of Venus-Mars. Venus and Mars is a very specific form of attraction. Some people find someone attractive, some people don't find them attractive. That's what Venus-Mars is about. Someone who wants to be a universal sex symbol, like Marilyn Monroe or Brigitte Bardot, if they had a Venus-Mars aspect, for example, a Venus-Mars square or a conjunction, wouldn't work. They would not be able to carry it through because their attractiveness would be too specific. So that's perhaps why she was able to be, you know, again, like Marilyn Monroe, a sort of a universal sex symbol for a time. Of course, now perhaps people haven't heard of her so much, but you know, certainly, you know, you had Marilyn Monroe, and almost you could say Brigitte Bardot sort of followed her. So there always has to be someone. Maybe that was, or maybe that's just saying something about the mid to late 20th century. So I mean, I could say a lot more about her chart, and I think the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction is something very important, particularly as it's linked with the moon. The moon is making a sesquiquadrate to the moon Jupiter, to her Mercury-Jupiter conjunction. Now, you could say sesquiquadrate is a difficult aspect. So maybe that's about stress. Maybe she's not fully comfortable with that Mercury-Jupiter principle. Or it could just be there's a link. There's an aspect between the moon and Mercury and Jupiter. The moon is the public, and so you hit that Mercury-Jupiter, and that's what she can reflect. And so with Mercury-Jupiter in Libra, she's certainly got things to say, whether it's about animals, whether it's about politics. I mean, she's got into trouble in terms of what she said about sort of other things, about sort of immigration, for example. And I believe she was a supporter of the Front National and the National Rally. And so she was in the end, she was certainly a person of the right. And Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella, the leaders of the National Rally, were very quick to mourn her death and to comment on it. Of course, everyone did. I mean, even Macron did, because she was a major figure in France. Now, the birth of her son is interesting. So her son, I believe, her son was born at 2:10 in the afternoon, in the morning. I mean, I think that's right. But so this is the chart of her son. Nicolas Charrier Bardot. So she didn't really stay long with her son. I think her son was not brought up by her. I think the son was brought up by her husband at the time's parents, and they have not had a good relationship, as far as I understand it. So he's now 60. I think he was born in 1960, so he'd be 65. So he's going to be 66 as his next birthday. So I mean, I'm not particularly interested in the son's chart per se. I'm more interested in what was happening to Brigitte Bardot when she gave birth. I'm looking at that comparison. So if we look at the Bible, so what we've got here is we've got in the inner wheel we've got Brigitte Bardot's horoscope, and on the outer wheel we've got the chart of her son. So in other words, what that means is what transits did Brigitte Bardot have when she gave birth? Now, she might have, to an extent, resented her birth, but like it or not, she was giving birth to her only child. It was an event in her life, and she might not have felt particularly happy about it, but the chart did show some happiness, because we have, at the time of the birth, Venus was at 10 degrees Sagittarius and Jupiter was at 20 degrees Sagittarius. So there was a wide Venus-Jupiter conjunction when she gave birth to her son. And the midpoint, the Venus-Jupiter midpoint, I mean, you don't look at every midpoint, but when you've got two planets in a wide conjunction, you would look at the midpoint. The midpoint is 15 degrees Sagittarius. So the Venus-Jupiter midpoint was right on Brigitte Bardot's ascendant. So she's got an ascendant of around 15 degrees Sagittarius. So she had the transiting Venus-Jupiter midpoint right on her ascendant. And that fits a birth. Regardless of what she was feeling at the time, there is the objective event. Society regards a mother giving birth to a healthy child as being a good thing. And that is reflected by the chart. But what's also interesting is that, remember, Brigitte Bardot had an exact Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in her chart. Exact Mercury-Jupiter conjunction, we know that. There is a Mercury-Jupiter conjunction. But if we look at what Mercury and Jupiter Mercury was doing at the time of her birth, there was an exact Mercury-Saturn conjunction when she gave birth. So Brigitte Bardot was born with an exact Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in Libra, and when she gave birth, there was an exact Mercury-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn. So that's kind of interesting. This woman with Mercury-Jupiter, with a Mercury-Jupiter conjunction, gives birth to a Mercury-Saturn conjunction. And maybe with such a close Mercury-Jupiter conjunction, she was very sensitive to Mercury. And Mercury-Saturn conjunction, well, as far as she was concerned, that said something about her son. And you read what she said, her remarks about her son afterwards. There is a certain negativity. And I think that polarity between Mercury-Jupiter and Mercury-Saturn is really, really significant. And finally, there is the question of Brigitte Bardot's death. And I believe that Brigitte Bardot died on December the 28th in Saint-Tropez at 5 to 6 in the morning. So, okay, so here's her chart. And there are a couple of things to think about. The first is there's the high leg. I talked about the high leg yesterday. So the high leg, Hyleg, is the giver of life. And the theory is that if the giver of life receives a negative direction, a bad direction, that can lead to death. That takes John Worsdale's view. I mean, he was an early 19th century astrologer. He rather pompously described that aspect as the terminus vitae, just using Latin for the sake of it. I mean, it sounds impressive, doesn't it? This aspect is the terminus vitae. It's the one that kills you. And so you'd think that her high leg would be the sun. She has got the sun above the horizon. Okay, it might be in Libra, but she daytime birth. You would think that an aspect to her sun would be the aspect that would kill her. And you would say, well, you may not be able to use the moon because the moon is below the horizon. Although I think there is some view that you can use the moon if it's ever so slightly below the horizon. But as we know, the moon was not below the horizon when she was born. It just looks to be below the horizon. In fact, the moon was above the horizon. So there may be an argument here for taking the moon as a high leg. And I'm contradicting myself here because there was a comment there was a comment on my last video about King Charles. Someone commented and they said, well, they were born with a new moon in the seventh house, so is the moon the high leg, the sun high leg? We know, so thinking about what the high leg is, thinking maybe the moon is a high leg, and I think my response is saying, well, it would be daytime chart, so you go for the sun, and that was my response. But you wouldn't necessarily go for the moon. But having looked at Brigitte Bardot's chart, I don't know. I'm not convinced. I'm thinking maybe one could take the moon as a high leg. And if we look at the actual events astrologically going on when she died, I think that there is evidence to say that, yeah, that is the right approach. So let me just think about what was going on in her life. So there was a full moon. So here's the full moon before she died. This was a full moon set for December the 4th. I sent for Saint-Tropez. So here you see that this full moon was at 13 Gemini. And set for Saint-Tropez, it's square the nodes, and in fact, set for Saint-Tropez, moon is on the midheaven, and the nodal axis is on the ascendant. So, why is this relevant to Brigitte Bardot? Well, if you do a comparison, if you put Brigitte Bardot, where's Brigitte Bardot gone? Her natal chart, and you put the full moon around it. This full moon is right on her moon. She has the moon at 12 something Gemini, and the moon is 13 Gemini. So this full moon on her full moon, this full moon on her moon seems to have been, it's the pre-death lunation. So that's one thing to think about. So I think that the full moon is clearly linked with that. Now, turning to primary directions. So she was 91 when she died. So yeah, good age to die. I mean, it's reaching 91. That's quite an achievement. And she therefore, if we remember what primary directions are. 1 degree is one degree of the Earth's movement after you're born represents 1 year. So at 90, when you've turned 90, the Earth has turned 90 degrees. In other words, that's approximately 6 hours after you were born. So we would set a chart for approximately 6 hours after she was born, if we wanted to look at that. I mean, that's not how primaries are calculated, but I'm doing this to just try to illustrate primary directions in a simple way, because primary directions, they are quite complicated. So if we look at the position of the planets just after 6 hours after she was born, we know when the Earth had turned 91.25 degrees. Here is what we see. So Jupiter has just crossed the descendant. And I'm actually interested in Jupiter, not so much Mercury. So you can see that Jupiter, when she was, so if we look at, if we go back to her birth, she was born with Jupiter in the 10th house. And 6 hours after she was born, Jupiter is, so that's not what I wanted to look at. Where's it gone? That is the chart of the storming of the Bastille, but I don't think I've got time to look at that. So Jupiter's just crossed the descendant. But, in fact, it seems as if Jupiter is below the horizon. It's not. Jupiter was just above the horizon. And so what we've got here is we have got Jupiter making directions to her descendant. So in fact, if we want to look at precise dates, I use the Marinus program. We've got Jupiter was conjunct her moon. Directed Jupiter was conjunct her moon in June 2025. It was conjunct her descendant in September 2026. So this is, remember she's got moon on the descendant. So that part of the sky, the descendant, is where the shadow of the moon is. I mean, I know the moon has moved on, but the shadow of the moon where she was born, that area around the descendant, 6 hours later, is particularly sensitive. So Jupiter hitting that point does seem to coincide with her death. Jupiter is her, she's born with Jupiter in the 10th, and 6 hours later, as Jupiter goes across the descendant, that represents her death. 6 hours, just over 6 hours, that corresponds to 91 degrees, and so she dies at 91. So there is a certain logic there. And so, I mean, I think that there is a case here for taking the moon as a high leg. And I think if you link that also with the full moon before she was born on December the 4th, again hitting her moon, I think that we do get some idea of, how we might be able to have predicted her death in hindsight. I must make that clear. Would we have predicted that beforehand? Well, I don't think so. Would we be constantly looking at Brigitte Bardot's chart, trying to work out when she's going to die, and why would one want to do that? Anyway, that's Brigitte Bardot. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.